Okay. So, hello everyone. I am Maryam Khan. I have completed my bachelor's in English last year from the Lahore University of Management Sciences, and currently I'm working as a faculty member in the English department for a foundation year program in Karachi, that's a city in Pakistan. So, delving right into my paper, the title is Exploring Horney's Womb Envy in the Selected Works of Saddat Hassan Manto and Ismat Chughtai. So my thesis or my main argument for this paper is as follows. In this paper, the focus will primarily be on the theoretical framework of Karen Horney as a feminine psychoanalyst, which will be used to interpret the selected translated short stories by Saddat Hassan Manto and Ismat Chughtai. The analysis will be based on Horney's theory on womb envy, and in doing so, I will highlight the psychosexual relationship between men and women, with the focal point being the dispositions, traits, and inhibitions of the characters as depicted in the chosen narratives. So as you can judge from my thesis statement and from my main argument, I have localized my paper and I have localized the context, right? So I just want to give you a brief overview of the South Asian context that I'd be talking about. So along the same time as Horney in the mid-90s, when she was advocating for the need for feminine psychoanalysts to make theories and to be able to be involved in the discourse on female sexuality, there were prominent South Asian writers like Saddat Hassan Manto and Ismat Chughtai who were also creating stories in the world of Urdu, in the field of Urdu literature, and they were focusing primarily on taboo subjects such as female sexuality, prostitution, rape, and many others. So for the purposes of this paper, I'm going to specifically focus on their selected works which delve into the topics of female sexuality, which was considered to be a very tabooed and a very stigmatized subject of the time. So they were writing in the post-World War period, and these writers were heavily influenced by high modernism, which was evident in the cultural and the political movements of the time in the South Asia, such as the Progressive Writers Movement, which was advocating for the need for liberation and the need for freedom of writers. So in order to tell you why I chose Chughtai and Manto specifically as my point of focus is for two reasons. So firstly, their works include very, very complex characters. And even though their plots are also very complicated in terms of having many subjects in terms of delving into the psychological and the sociological state of the time and the characters, the characters themselves are also very, very, very round. And there is no black and white areas in terms of the characters that Manto and Chughtai display. And secondly, even though I mentioned that they were influenced by, and they were part of the progressive writers movement, right? But they went 10 steps ahead of the progressive writers at the time. So they wrote about topics and they wrote stories which the members of the progressive writers movement themselves felt were too obscene or too immoral to be talked about. And interestingly, both Manto and Chughtai also went to trial for their stories. Manto's story was called Boo, and Ismat Chughtai's story was called Lihaf, which translates into the quilt. And both these stories
what's happening here?
Both these stories were primarily focusing on female sexuality. And I also understand that using a Western theory on a South Asian context may call for criticism, but the project is aware of the differences in the cultural context. And I believe that the aim of the project is to use psychoanalytical tools to explore the characters.
I don't know.
So we've kept them localized to their context while using Horney's theories. And the primary text I will be focusing on are Manto's short story called Mummy and Chughtai's short story called Wild Pigeons, and I will be using translated versions for both as they were primarily in Urdu. So as we talk about Manto and Chughtai, let's briefly skim over what kind of criticism Manto and Chughtai faced during that time, right? So just as Horney, when entering the field of psychoanalysis, faced criticism by her peers and by the other members of the field, Manto and Chughtai were also facing criticism, and there was there were extremes for the kind of response they were getting. So there were people like Fehmida Riaz, who are also very important figures in the field of Urdu literature, who said that after Manto, there is none like Manto, right? But then there were people like Sajjad Zahir, who was a very important member of the progressive writers movement, and he said that moreover, in European literature, anarchist conservatism was making its appearance in the form of obscenity, immorality, and revolts against all kinds of cultural discipline. And some undiscerning intellectuals, which obviously he's referring to Manto and Chughtai, were copying this foul innovation of decaying capitalism, thinking it was progress, right? So you can see the kind of backlash that they were getting. But to that, Manto responded that he's no sensationalist, right? Asked why would he want to take clothes of a society or a civilization or culture that in any case is naked. So, and this sentiment is also quite apparent in Manto's works, especially in the ones that I'll be using, right? Because he believes that the kind of oppression and the kind of discourses that were going about in the South Asian culture, they were already stripping the culture of its morality. And him bringing such as prostitution and female sexuality
in this program anywhere.
were not the points which were causing the culture to be stripped of its morality.
That time.
For same thing goes for Chughtai as well, right? So Tahira Naqvi, whose translated works I've used, she said that critics were bothered by Chughtai's focus on the middle class women, right? So even in the story that I've chosen, the protagonist is a middle class woman, right? She's a housewife and she's a middle class woman. And this focus was considered to be Chughtai's myopic view of the world. But Tahira Naqvi argues that this was indeed not her myopic view, but this was a point of focus which Chughtai deliberately made. So coming to the theorist whose framework I'll be using for the essay, for the paper. So Karen Horney was a feminine psychoanalyst born in 1885 in Germany. And she noticed the extent of male dominance in the field of psychoanalysis, right? And when she entered the field, Freud and his colleagues were the dominant members of the field of psychoanalysis. And she didn't agree with many of Freud's theories and his work. So she worked and she reworked his theories. She formed theories explaining the socio-cultural factors in feminine sexuality. So one major aspect which she refuted of Freud's work was its biological determinism, right? And she formed the field of self-analysis as a form of therapy. So even though the main focus of this essay is supposed to be Horney's essay on womb envy, I am also going to include her another essay called The Dread of the Woman in order to complement her argument on womb envy. So Karen Horney argues that there is that for the men, there's always a nurturing, selfless, and a self-sacrificing mother. That is the image of the mother. That is the image of the woman that they entertain. That is the ideal embodiment of the woman who could fulfill all his longings and expectations, right? Because this is the only lens through which men see women as mothers. They believe that the power and authority as, sorry, just a minute. They believe that because this is the only image which they have of a woman, they feel envious of the authority which a woman has as a mother, right? So in very plain terms, Horney argued that the man is envious of the woman's womb and her capability of mothering. And he is so envious of this capability and his own incapability that he wants to exert masculine control over the women to overcompensate for his inabilities, right? And this theory was directly in response or to refute basically Freud's theory on penis envy, which argues that there's this feminine desire and feminine jealousy of the male penis and the desire to be more like a man. And Horney argued against him, and she said that Freud's theory on penis envy is basically forwarding the male genius of the field of psychoanalysis. But in fact, the truth of the matter, according to Horney, was that men are indeed envious of the woman's capabilities of mothering. And the story that I'll be using for this to elaborate on this theory will be Jungli Kabootar by Ismat Chughtai and Mummy's Manto. Right, to just give an example, since we're short on time, I'm going to briefly give an overview of how I'm applying this theory on Manto's mummy. So this story is about a man named Chadda who is overly obsessed by a woman called Stella Jackson, whom he constantly refers to as mummy, right? So in this story, there is this infantile dependency that Chadda has with mummy, whom we find out as the story progresses, who is not Chadda's real mother, like not his biological mother, right? So she's a woman whom he came across and now considers to be his mom. So there is infantile dependency, but not only that, there is an obsession and a compulsion, right? So in the story, you will see that there's this constant repetition of the word mummy herself. Mummy Zindabad is a dialogue from the story, which translates to mummy, long live mummy, right? And this overt obsession is not the only thing strange about the relationship, right? So there's this relationship of a procuress in some way that the woman whom he refers to as mummy holds in his life, because she throws parties and she organizes parties for Chadda and his friends so that they can socialize with women, right? And that socialization is also not platonic. It's it is exactly to fulfill Chadda and his friends' desire to be around women, right? And Horney argues that the nature of envy that men have for women, right? This stays amicable as long as the mother is nurturing, right? So as long as mummy holds a nurturing and a nursing response to Chadda's desires, there is a very amicable relationship between them. But as soon as this relationship changes, there is the aspect of male dominance, right? So in the story, there's conflict between Chadda and mummy because she is rebuking him from forcing himself on an underage girl, right? So once she rebukes him, he loses his temper. He calls her a pimp, and he says that Phyllis is mine. Phyllis is the woman that he's forcing himself on, the girl, right? So this obsession, and Horney argues that this kind of anger and this kind of temperament is stemming from his envy, because now he is not looking at the mother just as a mother, right? Now he's looking at someone who has authority and who has power, which he lacks. Moving on to the other essay that I'll be focusing on, which is called The Dread of the Woman, and I'll be using Ismat Chughtai's Jungli Kabootar, Wild Pigeons, the short story, in order to apply this theory. So Horney argues that there is a never-ending conflict between a man's longing for the woman and his dread of her, right? So she says that there isn't, the man doesn't dread the woman's presence, but rather there's a conflict between him wanting to be around her and wanting to be with her and his fear of her, which we also saw in her essay on womb envy, right? And Horney argues that the level of fear is so severe that the man denies it even to himself. He denies that he is fearful of the woman, even though he agrees that the woman is capable of all evil and all that is sinister in the world. But since the fear poses a threat to his masculine self-respect, he denies it so much that it becomes irrational to his own mind, right? And and Horney argues that the way that he denies it is through objectifying women, through exerting masculine control over women. So this is going to be in this theory is going to be to complement the theory on womb envy by Horney. So I'm going to be using both these theories in order to explore her theoretical framework and the psychosexual relationship between men and women. And lastly, there's going to be a section on criticism on Horney, right? So there's professional criticism which she faced because of her marginalized status as a woman in the field of psychoanalysis, because during her time there were not many women who were indulging in this field, and as we all know that Freud was the main figurehead of this field. So she received a lot of criticism by Freud himself, which is not surprising considering that she was actually reworking and refuting many of his theories herself, right? And she argued that Freud's theories were focusing on male bias and were misogynist in their foundation. That is why the field of psychoanalysis itself was misogynist. And lastly, there is criticism on her theoretical instability. So critics argue that there is theoretical instability in her work because even though she's advocating that there is a need to focus on the social and the cultural aspects of psychoanalysis and how female sexuality works, she sort of deviates to biological determinism herself, which is interesting considering that she's also refuting, she's also arguing that this is something that's a weakness in Freud's work itself. So this was it. Thank you so much.
Where is the host? Who is the chair of the session here now?
I was the co-host because I was sharing my screen, but I'm not the host.
I mean chair of the session.
I don't think they're here right now.
There was somebody speaking from the classroom, right?
Yes, yes.
It was a very beautiful presentation, Maryam Khan. Love it.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry for the weaknesses. This is my first time presenting on such a platform.
No, this is wonderful. I also teach Saddat Hassan Manto in my MPhil courses because I do a lot of South Asian things in my university. So that was a great experience listening to you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I think we should talk to ourselves because there is no host here now.
So if anyone would like to pose any questions, then I'm open.
Yeah, please.
Or, maybe we can, if no one has any questions, then maybe we can move on. So yes, please.
We still have 5 minutes more, right? No.
Yes, I believe so.
Then we can move on to Neeti's paper.
Yes, I think we'll do that. So let's not wait for the host.
So let's hear what Neeti has to say about our presentation.
Yes.
So let's continue.
Is my screen visible to you?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay. Okay. Let's begin. Am I audible? Audible?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
we can hear you.
Let me begin. Good morning or good evening. Good morning to the ones who are in US and good evening to the ones who are on my side of the continent. I'm Neeti, and it's indeed my honor to be a part of this 15th annual conference of the South Asian Studies Association. Let me begin by introducing myself. I'm a lecturer of English language at Nitte University and a part-time research scholar at Mangalore University in Mangalore. It is a small city in the southern state of Karnataka in India. My research, my PhD research, is based on a feminist reading of a local folk epic called the Sūri epic. And my presentation for today is titled Pound Her Well, Turn by Turn, Examining Female Agency in Select Tulu Kabitas. Let me begin my, one second, just give me a minute. Yeah, let me begin my presentation by giving you an overview of the subtopics. These are the subtopics that I'll be discussing today in my presentation. First, I'll be discussing the context in which I'll discuss Tulu language and its culture. Then my primary text, When Moonlight is Very Hot. Then I'll show you some excerpts from the text. After that, I'll discuss the critical tools that I've applied and the comparative framework, followed by the key findings. First, let us discuss the spatio-temporal relations and place the primary text of my paper. The text I'm using is an anthology of work songs and dance songs referred to as kabitas, sung by women in monsoons whilst working in the paddy fields to ease their hard labor. The songs selected can be located as part of the agrarian context. They are sung in the Tulu language, which happens to be my mother tongue as well. Tulu is a Dravidian language spoken in the southern state of Karnataka in India. It has a rich history of oral narratives, and these include long-form oral epics known as pardanas and shorter songs such as the kabitas discussed here. These oral narratives form a crucial part of the folklore culture. And the women who work in these fields don't have any ownership of the fields and are just laborers who work for wages under their village chieftains. Most of the local communities in Tulu Nadu follow the matrilineal system of inheritance, where the daughter is the heir of the ancestral property passed down from her mother. Here it is very pertinent to note that while the inheritance is matrilineal, the head of the household always remains a male member, which is usually an uncle or the son-in-law. Therefore, it wouldn't be wrong to say that it follows the patriarchal way in spite of being matrilineal. These songs are compiled and translated into English by Professors Chinnappa Gowda and Surendra Rao of Mangalore University. The anthology is called When Moonlight is Very Hot. There have been several anthropological, sociological, and folkloristic studies on these oral narratives, but they've not been subjected to a literary analysis. This is also because the translation of the song was done only recently. And that is the reason behind this endeavor. I am trying to analyze this anthology from a literary angle and making an attempt to delve into the diverse facets of experience of these women. They belong to the lower socioeconomic strata of the society and are commonly exploited and sometimes display outright sexuality and protest, which is evident in some of the songs. In order to analyze these kabitas, I'll first read some excerpts from the kabitas for you. I'll be discussing 4 kabitas here. These are the 4 listed ones. Let me begin with the first one, which is Work, Work Only. Work, Work Only refers to the landlord sending his bondsmen to procure women workers for his fields. The women refuse to accompany the bondsmen and he retorts to violence. It also sheds light on the commodification of these women when the bondsman pawns these women to get betel nut and a pot of toddy. So let's read the kabita. Work, work only. Then did our bondsman sharpen his moustache red. His reddish eyes did glower. Brandished he his swagger stick. Work, work only. Work, work only. Beat us not, you bondsmen. We will come. Come soon we will. Tying up their disheveled hair, set out those women soon. He then hurried to Shetty's shop. Pledged woman he bought his betel nut and chewed it well. The next song is Lady Dharane, the song of Lady Dharane, and is from which I've taken my title as well. The song has Dharane, the migrant woman, coming down for employment, and it talks about how these women are sexually exploited by their employers. Please note the trigger warning for sexual assault and rape before we proceed. Let me read the poem, the song, I'm sorry. Then come Our Lady Dharane, then come landlords too, Our Lady Dharane. Then comes from one side Our Lady Dharane, another from another side Our Lady Dharane. Wink they at each other, Our Lady Dharane. Pull her they to hut so old, Our Lady Dharane. Share her they will, Our Lady Dharane. Make her lie prone to our lords, Our Lady Dharane. Pound her well, turn by turn, Our Lady Dharane. She writes and sighed at every turn, Our Lady Dharane. This is one of the most powerful kabitas that we have in the anthology. And this ends with the death of Lady Dharane here. We'll move on to the next kabita, which is the Song of Chennu. Song of Chennu. So Chennu is about, Chennu is a lady. She comes begging for some salt and chilies to her mistress's house, but is outright denied. So here goes the kabita. Big pot and oven she kept Chennu, had but broken rice to put. To her hovel they came, Chennu, guests no less than 5. Will you give me some salt, my mistress? Will you give me chilies? Will you give me salt? Begged Chennu. Will you give me chilies? No salt for Chennu, said mistress. No chilies for you. No salt for Chennu, said mistress. No chilies for you. And the last song that I'll be presenting here is the song of Madhura, where Madhura is a well-known dancer and is warned against showing her charm as it might attract the attention of men. It starts with, charming girls are coquettish and vain, Madhura. Under sweet mango tree, stones aplenty are strewn. Yet enchanted was Chenna by the girl so charming, even as cock was drawn to peck at paddy and spread. So I've used a few critical tools to analyze these kabitas. The first one is by Gail Umbet. The views of Gail Umbet were employed to address the violence experienced by the women and the relationship between violence and caste, class, and urban-rural divisions. According to Umbet, exploitation is not just faced by women in the lower caste or class. The same is evident in the song Work, Work Only, where the landlord's wife and the working women both share the same suffering, only at different levels. The landlord's daughter will eventually only end up doing the dishes and taking care of other chores, which places them in a similar exploitative state as that of the other women who suffer at the hand of landlords and their manservants. I'll just read the portions where there is a reference to the landlord's wife, his daughter, and his son. Let me begin. Angry and hopping is our landlord when he went to the field. Angry and hopping he was to make his lady pregnant. If a dear daughter were to be born, in the morning to wash all the utensils, work, work only. Then when it comes to son, things change. Let me read that portion. Mother served him green grind of vegetables with flavored ghee. He ate his rice with milk. Coming out, he dusted the seat in the hall and sat there in the state to earn the name of the Lord. The working women, when we talk about working women, they are in fact twice removed from their agency. First, because of their caste, and second, because of them being women. This is evident in this particular song, where the bondsman just casually pledged the women for a betel nut and a pot of toddy, or even Dharane's case, where she was sexually assaulted and eventually, which leads to her death. Now, Ombed also remarks about the social definition of a woman's status with respect to her being the submissive wife and the independent prostitute. This particular statement could be illustrated in the Song of Madhura, where the women warn Madhura about pursuing physical pleasure because charming girls are coquettish and vain, according to them. There are several other instances where women give similar warning to each other because of the constant threat they face and their state of vulnerability to violence at the hands of men. Moving on, the next name is Iris Marion Young. In her Justice and the Politics of Difference, she opines that members of a group or have a specific affinity with one another because of their similar experience or way of life, which prompts them to associate with one another. The same could be applied to these women who are united with their shared wrongs. Hence, an element of sisterhood is also prevalent, where they're constantly watching out for each other. In one of the songs called the Song of Tali, they welcome the migrant woman who comes seeking for employment, and they warn her to be wary of the men who might be lurking behind the bushes. Having said this, women across the caste hierarchy fail to show this same attitude and don't miss a chance to exploit other women. For example, in the song of Chennu, we saw, although the landlady asks for the well-being of Chennu's child, she refuses to lend her any salt or chilies in her eyes cruel. The next name is Betty Wong, and Betty Wong in her folk songs as regulators of politics opines, one of the most important functions of folklore is its service as a vehicle for social protest. Wherever there is injustice and oppression, one can be sure that the victims will find some solace in folklore. Through jokes, songs, and proverbs, the anger of the folk is vent upon the often frighteningly unassailable individual or institution. The Kabitas could also be seen as songs of protest here. The rhetorical questions, which are a constant recurrent motif in these songs, could also be an indicator of this. For example, in Chennu's song, the mistress refuses to lend any chili or salt to her in spite of her repeated requests. But she does ask about the well-being of the child, for which Chennu replies sarcastically. Let me just read the portion to you. Who is now with the child, Chennu? Who is with the child? Tomcat is with the child, mistress, and a black dog too. Won't the dog bite it, Chennu? And won't the cat scratch? The dog has sense, my mistress, and the cat is kind. However, it would be unfair to reduce these songs to only protest songs. The songs are multidimensional, and protest themes is one of the parameters. The Kabitas are eventually compared to wool of poetry, as examined by Sheikh Tibian Low in his essay titled Political Protest, Ideology and Social Criticism in Wool of Poetry. Now, wool of people are a West African ethnic group predominantly found in Senegal. Wool of poetry is performed by fisher folk and rural workers. Low stresses on the need of elevating these work songs to scholarly level because he does not want to differentiate the artistic space, the labor space, or the academic space. And he visualizes the poems as providing a peek into the communities. The same could be said about the Kabitas as well, where these women express themselves and their everyday struggles against poverty and exploitation. However, I've tried my best to be careful in not reducing the experience of these women to mere victimhood, thereby othering them by applying Western gender theory to elevate the paper to a scholarly level. These, in conclusion, I'd like to say that these are gradient spaces where men are absent, provides a voice for these women, and the voices question the caste and gender hierarchy prevalent, and also becomes a means of catharsis for these women. They might not be like the literary canonical text with regard to language and style, but they do provide the much needed voice which these women otherwise lack. Thank you for listening to me.
Neeti,
Yes.
I have something to share with you.
Yes.
After listening to your presentation, I'd like to listen to one of the kavitas in Tulu language. Is it possible?
Tulu, is it?
Yeah.
I don't have it in Tulu right now. Maybe I could send it to you, or maybe I could find it and just send it to you. I have it only translated. I am not very good with these because it's mostly sung in the field and it's recorded audio. We don't have them written down. And Tulu does not have a script, let me tell you. Tulu is written in the Kannada script. Kannada is a different language which is spoken in Karnataka. So I have them compiled in a book. So that's there.
In our part, in Nepal also we have got Asare songs. Similar type of, during the paddy plantation they sing a lot of things, and we don't have the issues that you have raised here. For instance, the issues of sexual assault and so many other things. But we have those merry-making kind of things, making fun and in order to ease the
labor,
hard work in the field.
Hard work.
They sing.
Yes. That's also there. Actually, some dance songs are very jovial and pulling each other's legs and all that. That's also there, but I've chosen these particular songs. Anyone else? Is the host now there? Actually, no.
We don't know who the host is.
Host is not there. Okay. Okay. So who is next? Any idea, sir?
So I'm the next one.
Okay, go on, sir. All yours. I'll just mute myself.
Okay, thank you. Will you on-share your screen? How do you stop it?
Okay. I can help you share screen. Let's see. I'll make you a co-host. Okay. And then you should have a green button at the bottom that will say share screen.
I can see that.
Oh, 1 second. There we go. Do you have permissions now?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Can you see my screen?
Almost.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect.
You might want to put it on slideshow.
Yeah. Good morning to those friends who are in America, and good evening to those people in South Asia. My paper is titled Rebel as Creative Anarchist, Modes of Resistance in Nazrul Islam, Qazi Nazrul Islam, a poet from Bangladesh, Bangla poet, and Bairagi Kainla, he is a Nepali poet. It's a kind of comparative studies on those two poets. My name is Komal Phuyal. I'm working as Assistant Professor of English in Central Department of English at Tribhuvan University, Kathmandu, Nepal. I've been working in South Asian literature, and lately my focus is on modes of resistance. How does the literature of resistance emerge, and what function does it do in society? So I have found these two poets having similar sort of ideas and providing us with a type of frame to understand the contour of rebel. I've taken these two poets and their two poems. Qazi Nazrul Islam and Bairagi Kainla invent their unique position to envision the contour of rebel in the Rebel, Bidrohi by Nazrul Islam, and Mateko Manseko Bhashan Madharat Pratiko Sadak Sita, drunk man's speech to the street after midnight, respectively. The rebellious self recognizes the space akin to the primordial universe from which to begin the world anew. In this study, I have used two critical concepts. The first one is from Michel Foucault's later ideas on neo-historicism, and the second one is David Jeffers' idea of the resistance. By using these two authors, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
So yes, sir. Yes.
It looks like it's on the first slide still. Did you mean to put it in presenting mode? Or you could click through like this as well if it's easier.
So do you see my screen now?
Yes.
I think, okay. So I have used these two concepts of these two people, you know, Michel Foucault and David Jeffers. Jeffers, Michel Foucault's concept of new historicism, and David Jeffers' concept of resistance, to see how these two writers come together in presenting the idea of rebel as creative anarchists. And when I go through Nazrul Islam, the studies carried out on Nazrul Islam, I find Nazrul Islam along the post-colonial lens only, and there are critics who have studied Nazrul Islam's philosophical synthesis of Hinduism, Hindu ideas, and Islamic ideas together in Bengali language. So there are people who talk about Bairagi Kainla as a sort of different voice in Nepali literature, but I have not found people comparing these two poets or any other things from this perspective, the perspective of creative anarchist. Creative anarchist to me is a very functional idea in which the persona reaches a very non-rationalist space from which to attack the prevailing ideas, prevailing repressive order. And these personas completely debunked the repressive order that does not allow them to bloom their personality in full-fledged form. And by debunking the prevailing order, they try to seek for a ground from which they can come up with a solid order, new order that is free from the ills of previous order. And the frame of interpretation, as I have already discussed, is these two ideas from Michel Foucault and David Jeffers. I'm going to read the relationship between self and polity in a repressive order, whether in Nepal in 1960s or colonial India in 1922. It's a response of self. When the self grows larger than the existing polity, the rebel is born. That is the premise of this research, this study. So, rebel and creative anarchy, Nazrul Islam and Bairagi Kainla treat rebellious self firstly as the agent holding firmly the ability to redefine the existing order, and then annihilating the very order to begin everything anew. The creative anarchy penetrates in both poems in quest of origin for new configuration after final annihilation of the old order. To Nazrul Islam, it was necessary to revolt against the British Raj in 1922, and he was trying to see the early Gandhi, or you could also say that he was trying to find out, a form that could bring the ideas of Subhash Chandra Bose or Bhagat Singh together in the form of Gandhi. So you can find Nazrul Islam's rebel Bidrohi in a very unique form, who takes the form of tornado to do away with all the foundations of the old order. On the other hand, if you look at the madman's, the drunk man's speech by Bairagi Kainla, you see the repressive order established by King Mahendra in 1959 in Nepal, that is called Panchayat system, and it is a huge response to the coup of King Mahendra. And here this rebel in Bairagi Kainla's poem, the drunk man is so intoxicated that he finds the road very narrow, and he wants he commands the road to widen itself to provide the huge space for the personality of ordinary citizen to bloom and to enjoy the liberty, to enjoy the freedom. Let me quote Kainla here, Bairagi Kainla here. Bairagi Kainla writes, when I emerged from the wine shop long after midnight has passed, cockerels crow their welcome from every coop and perch, flapping their wings in rebellion. So he sees, Bairagi Kainla sees all the elements supporting him in forming the voice for change, voice of protest. On the other hand, Nazrul Islam writes, I am disorderly and lawless. I trample under my feet all rules and disciplines. I am Durjati. I am the sudden tempest of ultimate summer. I am the rebel son of Mother Earth. So see how these two poets, one from Nepal and the other from, though he is taken as Bangladeshi poet now, in 1922, there was no Bangladesh or Pakistan, the other from colonial India, raising similar sort of voice in quest of a completely orderless or completely lawless state from where to reconstruct their own society, their own identity, their own ways of seeing the world, being the reality. So they come very close to each other. Even though Kainla writes this poem some 40 years after Nazrul Islam has written the poem Rebel, their persona have got similar faces, similar kind of ideas. So Kainla writes, and so the street is shrunken today, who steals its corner and verses, who tears life in chunks from its sides. Why is the street more narrow each night? Tear up this road and widen it. Kainla needs a very wide road, while Nazrul Islam says, I'm ever restless. I caper and dance as I move. I do whatever appeals to me. Whenever I like, I embrace the enemy and wrestle with death. I'm mad. I'm the tornado. When I read these two poems, I find them closely associated with another Nepali poet, Lakshmi Prasad Devkota. Lakshmi Prasad Devkota's Lunatic also comes up with the similar sort of ideas, though in this presentation, my focus is not on Devkota's poem. So I take you to the concluding section of my study, my presentation here now. The poetic persona in both Bangla and Nepali poets stand more immense than the existing social order. For they know that they hold the responsibility to dismantle the whole rigid system devoid of sense of justice and freedom and equality for the people at the bottom. In 1922, the British Raj exercised the power to subjugate the native people in whom Islam's rebel adds vigor and enthusiasm. King Mahendra of Nepal imposed coup in 1960, curtailing the rights of the people. Bairagi Kainla sees the blockade on the road to freedom after promulgation of partyless panchayat as the political system in Nepal. Kainla's persona goes insane at such political behavior of the state. Both Nazrul Islam and Bairagi Kainla send their protagonists beyond the existing domain of rationality, that is, the non-rational space. The general social understanding can term them intoxicated, mad, or crazy. However, the vision of creative anarchists emerges from both of them at the end because they develop power to outgrow the shield of the political order and assert their challenge against the polity. In true sense of the term, Nazrul Islam and Bairagi Kainla imagine the genuine self of the revolutionary, capable of bringing about total transformation. The mode of resistance resembles in both the poems. The colonial India must obtain her liberation by awakening the public that has slept for a long time. Kainla's drunk man shouts at the street to awaken the society and its intellectuals in quest of the wide road, which he hopes will make it comfortable for his posterity to scroll. The vision of complete demolition prevails in both poems, meaning that the traditionally accepted patterns of rationality are insufficient for the attainment of freedom and equality, and the cause of justice for the people at the bottom. The rebellious self transforms into agency who realizes the infinite space to start everything anew through creative anarchy in both poems. That's the end of my presentation. I thank you all for patiently listening to me, and I welcome questions now.
That was a beautiful presentation. We really enjoyed the slides here in the classroom. They were well laid out, clear, and easy to follow along. I also just wanted to make a note. I know I've been in and out with these other Zooms, but you have been doing a wonderful job at keeping time, everyone on this panel. So thank you so much. We have 25 minutes left, and I think one more speaker. If no one has any questions, if you do have questions, you can always type them into the chat as well, or send follow-up emails. All right, well, if there are no other questions, we can move on to the independent scholar. Abhishek, did you want, let's see, I'll give you screen sharing. Oh, perfect.
Can you see my screen right now?
Yes, looks good.
Thank you. Okay. So namaste and hello to everyone. Thank you very much to Professor Chappell and other organizing committee from LMU for giving me this opportunity to present my paper today. This paper actually is drawn from my PhD dissertation, and I will try my best to short it down and present in front of you. Okay. Prabandha is a corpus of recent historical monks and poets, kings, householders, and Jain pilgrimage sites. The texts of this corpus were written from the 13th to 16th century. The term recent here should not be taken as modern, but should be understood as those characters and places that are justifiable and identifiable after the period of Arya Rakshita, 2nd century BCE. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so from here. Next, the Prabandha Kosha is a well-known Prabandha text written by Rashekara Sūri in 1348 CE. Will be taken into consideration in today's presentation. This text, which is important and unique in its own way, consists of 24 biographies. Today, I am going to discuss the emplotment and historicity of the Prabandha of the Jain ascetic Haribhadra Sūri, who flourished between the 6th and 8th centuries. It constitutes the 8th story in the editions of Prabandha Kosha by both Hiralal Rasikdas Kapadia and China Vijaya. What is meant by the term emplotment in the present study? When Hayden White, 1928 to 2018, proposes the concept of emplotment in meta-history, he coins the term for examining the use of plot structure aiming at 19th century European historical discourses. This paper differs from what has been understood in the work Metahistory. In metahistory, White conceptualizes emplotment as a type of plot in history writing which historians subconsciously employ to write history using one of the four archetypes, namely romance, comedy, tragedy, and satire. Right. White derived his idea of plot type from the theory of the Western literary tradition of narrative formulated by the literary theorists Kenneth Burke and Northrop Frye, and its conception of plot types is therefore culturally specific. Hence, I want to signal that White's idea of emplotment, which as mentioned above is a neologism, will be used here only in its general conception, while its specific application will be translated into an Indian notion of analyzing narrative. The term emplotment, when used in an Indian context, will be denoted by the Indian word itivritti karana, which may be regarded as a Sanskrit as well as a Hindi neologism. The proposed term itivritti karana can suitably be used with respect to Indian narrative literature because although a neologism, its constituent part stem from within the Indian literary tradition itself. As mentioned above, the plot type conception is different in pre-modern Indian literature from what has been perceived by the literary theorists Kenneth Burke and Northrop Frye, and also in the larger Aristotelian tradition. It is possible to create an Indian theory of itivritti karana, inspired by White's work on emplotment in historiography, by drawing on theoretical principles of plot itivritta presented in the Bharatic tradition of Natya Shastra, the science of drama. The earliest Indian exposition of itivritta appeared in chapter 19 of the large Sanskrit treatise Natya Shastra by Bharata between 100 BC and 200 CE. The Bharata narratology provides the theory of itivritta, which is so important that Bharata announced it to be the body of drama, Natyasya Shariram. The Indian tradition of composing treatises on drama did not stop with Bharata. The tradition continued with the Dasharupaka by Dhananjaya, the Abhinav Bharati commentary by Abhinavagupta, the Natya Darpana by Ramachandra and Gunachandra, and Sahitya Darpana by Vishwanatha, which all are based on the Natya Shastra with some minor differences in explanation. The Natya Shastra additionally states that the plot is held together by 5 junctures, and there are 2 main types of plot, the governing plot, Adhikarika Itivritta, and the derivative plot, Prasangika Itivritta, i.e. the main plot and the subplot respectively. The Natya Shastra then presents a series of internal divisions of the plot which are useful for analyzing historical narrative, such as the Prabandha of Haribhadra Sūri. The first is a set of 5 stages, avastha, exhibiting the pursuit of the dramatic action towards obtaining the result to be accomplished. The 5 stages constitutes the primary level of the plot. They are beginning, prarambha, struggle, prayatna, possibility of attainment, prapti, sambhava, sure attainment of the result, niyata, phala prapti, and getting the result Phala Yoga. Now, the biography, wait, sorry, not yet. Okay. Now the biography of the Haribhadra can be divided into aforementioned 5 stages in accordance with their definition in the Natya Shastra. The beginning, Prarambha, can in the Prabandha of Haribhadra Sūri is identified with the opening sentences of the story, wherein the leading character Haribhadra is introduced as a comic and provocative personality. It is said that he once put his sandals over his eye, wore a metal sheet on his stomach, and carried with him a net, a hoe, and a ladder. These actions and objects were intended symbolically to insult followers of other philosophical views and challenge them to debate with Haribhadra. The first juncture in the story, namely the opening Mukha, can be identified as Haribhadra's encounter with the Jain nun, a sadhvi by the name Yakini. At this point in the Prabandha, Haribhadra passes by a crossroad, which is a motif that eventually reappears later in the story during Siddha's first encounter with Haribhadra Sūri. The opening juncture is defined in the Natya Shastra as entailing various objectives and emotive sentiments. The objective of the sadhvi is to finish her daily recitation schedule, while Haribhadra's objective is to criticize correctness of sadhvi's recitation, which is typical behavior for Haribhadra given his scholarly arrogance. Between the two characters, there are also various emotive sentiments from the point of view of Haribhadra. If the emotive sentiment, rasa of laughter, hasya, occurs when Haribhadra tries to correct the sadhvi by saying that the word chika chika is not the correct reading of the text. She is reciting, but the sadhvi then responds by saying that he is certainly freshly smeared, meaning that she finds Haribhadra's criticism dumb, which may have been some element of emotive sentiment, rasa of mercy, karunya. Moreover, there is emotive sentiment of peace, shanta, when Haribhadra accepts that he has been defeated by the sadhvi, wishes to become her student, and the student thus the story builds up the first turning point in Haribhadra's life. The opening juncture leads to the next plot stage, namely the struggle, prayatna, which occurs when Haribhadra first sees a statue of the Jina and pays deep respect to it by pronouncing homages in Sanskrit and Prakrit. The struggle is defined in the Natya Shastra as a pursuit, vyapara, towards the result led by someone experiencing growing anticipation. At this stage of the Prabandha, his singular pursuit is to see the teacher, Guru. The story brings the reader to anticipate that Haribhadra will receive the highest position in the Jain monastic community. Haribhadra's achievement represent a persistent longing to earn the highest recognition and fame. This is, however, not possible unless Haribhadra defeats someone in scholarly debate, which represents Haribhadra's constant longing of remembering the agency's fundamental object, i.e., Haribhadra's basic wish to debate. The possibility of attainment appears in the passage of Haribhadra Sūri's deep realization that it was an evil act that he committed killing of the 1,440 Buddhists. The possibility of attainment is defined in the Natya Shastra as an appearance of a small chance for attaining the result, Ishat Prapti, thereby manifesting some degree of development, bhava matra, in the story. The small chance for attaining the result must here be seen as the understanding and peace that Haribhadra Sūri finds his regret and atonement when he sends two monks to inform the community, and his knowledge expressed through the Prakrit verses of 9 rebirths of Gunasena and Agnisharman. The sure attainment of the result Niyata Phalaprapti is further development in the story, which is Haribhadra Suri's acceptance to let Siddharshi go to learn Buddhist logical argumentations, thereby defying Haribhadra Suri's earlier scholarly activities in composing texts while focusing Haribhadra Suri's to further let go of his inner emotion of sectarianism. Haribhadra Suri peacefully agrees with Siddharshi's wish, but nonetheless admonishes him that if he ever decides to stay with the Buddhists, then he must come back to return the Jain monk robes, which were given to him by Haribhadra's Jain monastic community. Between their many debates happened between Siddharshi and Haribhadra, and when the 22nd time Siddharshi came back to debate and give back their robes, the getting the result Phala Yoga, which emerges the Haribhadra Suri's deep reflection at the 22nd time that Siddharshi comes to see him. So this is the whole plot through the eye of Natya Shastra's Iti Vritti Karana. Okay, so this, the second major theoretical desideratum here, historicity. In reference to the Prabandha of Haribhadra Suri from the Prabandha Kosha, the term historicity here is meant how the text construct a sense of being true representations of the historical past, or in other words, what it is that gives the text a sense of being historical. In meta-history, White does not explain how historicity has been conceptualized in 19th century European historiography by Jules Michelet, Alexis de Tocqueville, Leopold von Ranke, and Jakob Burckhardt, given that these are considered some of the earliest historians in Europe. The proposed Indian term for historicity, namely Aitihasikta, can be understood in the Prabandha of Haribhadra Suri. It is argued that the text Aitihasikta can be understood in two different ways, one being a socially constructed textually external sense of Aitihasikta, and the other being narratively constructed Aitihasikta, that is internal to the text in the sense that emerges from the text narrative modes of Emplotment. For socially constructed sense of Aitihasikta, the American theorist Gabriel M. Spiegel's notion of the social logic of the text and further argues that historicity may be understood as a sense of authenticity, authority, and legitimacy that the text invokes in order to support its claim of being a true historical account of the past. This leads to a detailed discussion of the problem whether pre-modern India has any history in the form of modern Western sense of the term, and this in turn leads to a discussion of two diverging senses of the word itihasa belonging to pre-modern Sanskrit and modern Hindi. Traditionally, on the one hand, the term itihasa referred to a particular body Sanskrit literature that contains traditional Indian narratives of the ancient past in its modern usages. On the other hand, itihasa is the modern Indian word for history as an academic discipline and school topic. It is shown that these two usages of the word are not identical and are in some senses conflicting yet coexisting as different competing regimes of historicity. To give a sense of legitimacy, and this sense is related to social conflict of the text. The Prabandha Kosha thus invokes the authority of the author's teacher as the source of the stories, which is backed up by the intellectual and religious institution to which the teacher belongs. This form of authority is related to the Sanskrit tradition of epistemology, pramana, particularly having the form of the Jain notion of a reliable person, apta, and sacred tradition, agama. Next, the text's internal sense of historicity is narratively constructed. I argue that this sense of historicity emerges from the text's narrative modes of emplotment and their associated temporality, which leads to a discussion of senses of time in different narratives genres of Jainism, particularly the discussion between Jain Purana and Prabandha. The narratively constructed Etihasikta in the Prabandha of Haribhadra Sūri can be analyzed, focusing on how the text refers to familiar factual information such as known places, individuals, and text titles, and how the narratives make use of temporal markers. Thank you very much.
All right.
Well done. We're still seeing your screen, which is all right. Does anybody else have questions? Do we have questions for our last panelist? You can type them into the chat or you can unmute yourself.
Can they hear me?
Yep, and Dr. Chappell's here. I can turn on the video and show you.
Yeah, Abhishek, thank you. And I found it very lovely that here I am in the shadows. I found it very lovely that you chose the Haribhadra story of his encounter with the Yakini. And I'm wondering, in your own internalization of narrative art, if you're seeing a universal application of this story, which seems to indicate the template for the process of convincement. And I'm using the word convincement rather than conversion, because conversion has become a very political term. But convincement is the move, the embrace of what Jains call samyak drishti, where there is this certainty that arises that undermines what one might have always thought to have been the case. And that carries with it a true dramatic tension that then, I loved how you said Pala Yoga is the end, that there is a connection with this fruit that for Haribhadra changed the course of his not only philosophy, but also his life. So could you comment on narrative art and personal transformation?
Okay, so when I was translating and thinking the plot structure of the story from the perspective of Natya Shastra as Itivritta Karana in the story, so yes, there is a definitely from the Jain perspective, Jain philosophical perspective, the end of the story when he truly realized that he is very close to Samyak Darshana. But there is also one problem, if I say in the narrative, from the narrative perspective, because when he became first-time monk, at least from the Gunasthana point of view, he should have the Samyak Darshan at that point. But that did not happen. Maybe that did happen from the Dravya Rupa, how to say, the material way of Samyak Darshan, which is external, but internally, Haribhadra still wished to debate and puts other down, and also he had wished to become the highest, sorry, not achieve the highest position in Jain monastic community, as narrative said clearly. So yes, Dravya Samyak Darshana he had in the beginning when he became monk, but at the end when he had the debates 20 times debate with Siddharshi, at that time he really realized that this all samsaric debate and also this achievements are the meaningless, and so it clearly shows the true outcome of the story that Rajshekhara wants to tell the reader, the Bhava Samyak Darshan from the Jain philosophical perspective. Is this something that you?
Yeah, that's very helpful, and it also underscores that sometimes the best resolution is no resolution.
Yes.
Yeah.
Abhishek, how about Abhishek? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Give me break, yeah. How about using Vyavaharanaya and Nishchayanaya to
Yes,
explain?
this is also possible from Vyavahara and Nishchayanaya when we are talking about the narrative. It's again, this is a Vyavahar Samyak Darshan and Nishchaya Samyak Darshan.
My submission is like, according to Jain text, Vyavaharanaya is also true as much as is the Nishchayanaya from the Shwetambar perspective.
Yes.
Right. So I would like to suggest that the debate, the structure of debate is basically like Vitanda, and they are using a different kind of method.
Yes,
So
it's
following a pedagogy.
argumentations.
Yeah, argumentation. It's following a pedagogy in which the idea is not to put somebody down, but it's a pedagogical tool to put up the view in a more constructive and in a more argumentative way to clarify the idea of what the scholar is proposing, rather than putting somebody down. How about like that? So even the Vyavaharana is the truth, rather than telling that he later realized based on the Nishchayanaya. This is the idea that I'm coming up with. I'm not sure, but my understanding is going in this way.
Yes, that is true. From the Jain philosophical point of view, this is, I completely agree with your comments.
Thank you.
Yes, that is.
Really, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, if there are no further questions, we're gonna get prepared for the next sessions that start at 9:35. I know there was some confusion with a lot of the other Zoom links. We had an issue where Zoom wasn't letting us start all 4 of the concurrent sessions at once. So we just created 2 new Zoom links. All of those went out. We are in this Zoom link in the room 1226 is going to stay the same. So if you're jumping on for the second panel in this room, you can hang out or go out and check out new rooms. And we'll be sending updated links right now to anyone that needs help. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Should we start or wait for someone? Hello.
Hi, welcome. All right, so we are starting right on time with this one. We'll still have people join in as we go through because we're using the same Zoom link, but I'm sure there are some people joining this one that weren't at the last one. So are you still co-host or would we like to, let's see, I'll make you co-host so that you can have screen sharing capabilities.
Okay, yeah, I was looking for that, yeah.
Perfect.
So how can I share my screen?
If you are co-host, you'll go to the bottom and there'll be a green button that says share screen.
Yeah.
And then you can click that and it'll allow you to choose which screen it is you're going to share.
Okay, think.
Share screen button, Dr. Marat. So you can see.
Yeah, I did it, and so it says one participant can share at a time, and here is the screen. I don't know, it's a problem.
Yeah, if it pops up and it says screen and then you click the bottom right blue button.
Yeah, I clicked it and open. Where did it go? Just some problem, I don't know. Oh, just email it me. I don't know what's the problem with it. I'm sorry. I click it and it doesn't go there. I'm confused why it doesn't share the screen.
If it helps, you could always email me the PowerPoint and I could share it from my end as well.
I'm doing that. Yeah, that's the best option. Yeah.
Here, I'll
Sorry
type
for
my.
the delay.
That's okay. Here, I'll type my email into the chat. If you send it there, I should be able to.
Okay, yeah. Just a minute. I'm sorry for the delay. In a while.
So it's still not working?
Oh, no, just a minute. Okay, I have to send it to my email. Should not have taken this much time. I'm sorry for the delay, guys. So I have sent it. So did you receive it now? I'm sorry for the delay.
Let's see, I haven't gotten it
No,
quite
not
yet.
yet. Yeah, I think so. No,
Here it is. Okay, I will download. And if any other presenters feel they want to send it, just to be sure, you can go ahead and send it to that email address in the chat, and I'll have it here so that I can share screen and pop it up for you. So is everyone seeing the PowerPoint
yeah,
presentation?
yeah. We can see now.
Okay, perfect.
Thank
I will hit
you.
present, and then whenever you need me to hit next, you can just let me know next slide, and I'll do that.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So hello everybody. Thank you. This is my presentation. It's about China's Build Initiative and US policy options, and is the US doing too little, too late? So this is the title of the presentation. Can you go to the next slide, please? So outline of the presentation, a brief overview of the BRI, Chinese project of the century, and its global outreach. And then I'll focus on US-led initiatives or US policy options, how the US has responded. In economic domain, I'll briefly focus on the Indo-Pacific Economic Corridor. And then the next one is the Build Back Better World Plan. Then in the security domain, I'll focus on two key alliances that the US has been involved recently. One is the AUKUS, including Australia, and the other is the Quad one. So the US, Australia, India, and Japan. And then we'll, with that, I will conclude. So the next one, please. So what is the BRI, if we remember? So it was the project, the brainchild of President Xi that he outlined during his visit to Kazakhstan in Nazarbayev University, and then later on during his visit in Indonesia. So to say it briefly, it focuses on how to revive the old trade routes connecting China with Asia, with European countries and African countries. Currently, it covers about 65 countries, about 60% of the global population, and 1/3 of global GDP and global trade. And mainly they have been focusing on, it will bring economic development, it will bring infrastructure development, it will increase regional connectivity and trade, it will lead to transfer of knowledge and technology, and ultimately it will lead to sustainable development and the progress towards the achievement of 2030 agenda and sustainable development goals. So the Chinese leadership has been portraying it as a win-win situation for both China and participating countries. Next slide, please. And if we see which particular institutions are involved and how China has institutionalized the BRI. So there are funds from Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, China Development Bank, and Silk Road Fund, the Exim Bank, which is called Export-Import Bank, the New Development Bank. So all these organizations, they are involved. And of course, a tremendous role of China's state-owned enterprises. They have been building, they have been implementing infrastructure projects in participating countries. It has led to an increased outward FDI by Chinese state-owned SOEs and private firms, which reached 183 billion by 2016. And also the biggest banks of China, they have lent over $225 billion to BRI projects in many countries. And during the BRI summit in 2017, President Xi announced that an additional 100 billion yuan, or about $15 billion, will be contributed to the Silk Road Fund, and another 60 billion yuan, or about $9 billion, they will be used by China as a grant to fund additional infrastructure projects in numerous BRI participating countries. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. next slide, can I do it? Okay, thank you. So what is basically BRI? What are the, yeah, next slide. What are basically the dynamics behind the BRI? So, I can't do so. The next slide. So what particular, I think you are going, we are not synchronizing probably, sorry for that. So the previous slide, focusing on the imperatives or the motivations behind the BRI. So
Mr.
from
Murad
the,
Ali, may I suggest you give the slide number that you want? That might help.
okay, yeah, so slide number 5.
Sure. I'm sorry. Is this the right slide or do we need to go back?
Slide number 5.
Let's see if I can make
Right
this.
now it's showing 8.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
it's
Thank
showing
you.
8
Go
now.
back.
So
Go back to 5.
This one?
yeah, this one. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Thank
So,
you.
yeah. So what are the main motivations behind the BRI? So of course, there are domestic compulsions, for example, to reduce a regional disparity within mainland China. This has been one of the key objectives of the BRI. And of course, we know about the production overcapacity, excessive foreign reserves. China has been producing so much steel and cement and iron, and it needs external markets, how it can utilize these extra capacity. And of course, how to explore new markets for Chinese companies, for Chinese labor that are involved in infrastructure projects. In addition, there's also a broader consensus that it's basically geopolitical projects, and the main aim is to enhance the economic and political and strategic clout of China in many participating countries, and to challenge US global hegemony. For example, the recently published book by Doshi and Michael Beckel and many other authors, they have been focusing on that the end goal of China's global grand strategy is to achieve national rejuvenation by 2049, after fully replacing the US as a sole superpower. So because of these concerns, some of the major powers, they have also stayed away from the BRI. For example, the EU, the US, EU, Japan, Australia, and India, they didn't participate in the 2 BRI forums held in 2017 and 2019. So they cited many reasons like strategic, security, financial soundness, debt risks, environmental and social concerns that these actors cited. Slide number 6, next one, please. Yeah. So at the moment, for example, the contribution or overall commitment that is from China is about 1.4 trillion and it's still growing. If we look at the participating countries, so in the first BRI, about 57 countries participated. In the next one, 39 participated. And in overall these BRI forums, about 550 projects were signed, involved about 181 countries in international organization, and trade of about 71 billion. So there was a 23% rise from the first BRI forum in the second one. The number of projects that were signed, the number of people that participated, international organizations that participated. So a tremendous growth has been witnessed during the second BRI. Page number next, 7th slide. So now what's US, how the US has responded and what it has adopted, how it can counter the rising role of China in Asia Pacific and in many other countries, particularly US pivot to Asia and how to rebalance and how to counter the rising role of China in Asia Pacific. So one of the initiatives, the IPEC, and the core objects of it involves how to anticipate the role in Asia Pacific, how to have a tremendous and more visible role for the US. And 3 critical areas that the US has been focusing. It involves military planning, foreign policy, and economic and trade. But if we look at the actual implementation or actual role, how the US has played a role to implement projects. So an ADB report has said that it needs about 73 billion to connect or to link South Asia and Southeast Asia. While currently, current status is just 8 billion have been committed for this particular initiative, 1 billion for road, 5 billion for railways, and 2 billion for development ports. So it's although it has been, the US has been competing with China, but overall, if we compare, it's nowhere near to the BRI portfolio, near to the BRI size. Next slide, 8th. Now, besides this Indo-Pacific Economic Corridor, the US, along with its G7 members, it came up with another initiative called the Build Back Better World. It was, announced by President Biden during the G7 summit last year, that if China has the BRI, we think that there's a much more equitable way to provide for the needs of countries around the world. And they said that B3W has the potential to improve global welfare, reinforce good governance system, and strengthen partnerships. And they also mentioned that currently there is a infrastructure investment gap in many developing countries, about 40 trillion. And B3W will focus on physical infrastructure like fiber optics, clean transport corridor, clean power transmission line, and to strengthen digital transport energy networks. And they say it will attract investment and business in trading conditions, regulatory governance, standardization, supply chain integration, financial services. So mainly the focus has been that China, is the projects under the BRI, they are not green, they are not sustainable. It will lead to debt crisis, it will lead to environmental concerns. And as an alternative, what the G7 members have been telling that the B3W is more environment friendly, it's more sustainable. Next, please. Sorry. Slide number 9. And they have been also focusing on the soft power or the additional perspective that we will show adherence to democratic values and high standards and sorry, good governance, transparency, equal partnership, green and clean, security focused like resilient infrastructure, and there will be a significant role for the private sector investment. And Beckler in his recent book has also said that other schemes focus on blunting economic leverage by developing alternative change products and funding. The G7 B3W initiative will provide poor countries with infrastructure financing as an alternative to China's BRI. So again, if you focus on the overall portfolio, there is also a visible shift, particularly in the US, that they see China as a competitor. That's why next I focus on the how the US has responded in security and military domain. Next slide, please. So policy response in the security domain, for example, the rejuvenation of the quadrilateral security group. So as they said that the BRI is at least as much more a strategic initiative than an economic or domestic political one. So that's why the US has reinvigorated its alliances with other like-minded countries, and the re-emergence of the quadrilateral security group, or the Quad, as one example. It's a coalition of Australia and Japan and the US. And first, these countries they had come together in 27. And later on, it mostly remained dormant. It had gone into hibernation, the Quad, but it has recently become active, like the AUKUS that I'm focusing later on. And last year, they also held the first online summit of heads of the states of the Quad countries. And the joint statement that they issued is the spirit of the Quad, and which they said that, Indo-Pacific will be free, open, resilient, and inclusive. And they described the partnership as spark of hope to light the path ahead. And that's why China also condemned this initiative of the class that is China said that these people, they have been exaggerating the China threat, and China is just funding projects for win-win situation, and these countries, they need to come out of their Cold War mentality, etc. Next slide, please, 11th. The next what is significant initiative that emerged in the Indo-Pacific region, the tri-party alliance between Australia, the UK, and US. It was primarily aimed to build a class of nuclear-propelled submarines, but it also to work together in the Indo-Pacific region where the rise of China is seen as an increasing threat and to develop wider technologies. As mentioned by UK National Security Advisor, that AUKUS is perhaps the most significant capability collaboration in the world anywhere in the past 6 decades. And President Biden also mentioned that for a free and open Indo-Pacific and to address the region's current strategic environment, it's very important for our allies to come together to cement our relationship, to expand and deepen our cooperation. That's why the Chinese Foreign Ministry also termed these members that they are in the group of absolute Cold War zero-sum mentality and narrow-minded geopolitical concepts. So if we see both from the economic sphere as well as in security and military domains, the US has responded along with allies. Next slide, please. The 12th one. Next slide, please. The last one. So, yeah, the last slide, the 12th, yeah. So if we conclude the overall approach and the scale and the outreach of the BRI and the B3W, I mean, there is a consensus that the US will be unable to compete with China symmetrically, that is dollar for dollar, ship for ship, or loan for loan, in part because of China's sheer relative size. And we know that China is a global factory, it's the largest trading nation. It has tremendous, foreign resources. It has tremendous potential to fund infrastructure projects. So in that way, if we see the role of the US in B3W or Indo-Pacific Economic Corridor, so of course it cannot compete with China. But on the other side, if you say the additional level, the soft power, of course, is superior when it comes to democracy, transparency, freedom, human rights, and all these things. But if we analyze the needs of developing countries, so there are genuine economic needs, there are genuine infrastructure gaps, and that's where China has come to fill that particular gap. And that's why many, there is also dominant consensus that instead of focusing on the zero-sum approach or core mentality, there is a need to collaborate to complement the efforts of these countries, whether how US can leverage BRI and how China can help in the B3W. They shouldn't look from this perspective, how to outmaneuver the other, how to manipulate the other. So in that way, it can be a win-win situation for the US, for China, and for many participating countries. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions at all before we move on to the next presenter?
Yes, I have a question. This is Rafiq Tosani. May I go ahead?
Yes, yeah.
So my question is, you've talked about the different scales and the scope and the agreements, but the BRI is already, 8-9 years old. I was wondering if you had any sense of the impact. What has the BRI accomplished in terms of helping, say, Pakistan's growth, CPEC, or other BRI initiatives? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, if we say whether in Pakistan or in Sri Lanka or in Ethiopia, in Kenya, in many African countries, so somehow it's a mixed picture. For example, in Pakistan, it has built infrastructure, it has built under the BRI or CPEC, roads have been built, power plants have been established. So lots of visible infrastructure that we can see in many countries. So of course, there are those dividends, those developmental impacts, they are visible. But there are also concerns, particularly for debt issues, financial sustainability. And for example, the very notorious example is the Hambantota port that the Sri Lankan authorities were unable to repay the loans, and then China had to take the port for 99 years lease. So these kinds of apprehensions, they are there. But overall, of course, if the World Bank, if ADB and other international agencies, or particularly the Western donors, if they are unwilling to fund infrastructure projects, then China is, of course, a viable option.
May I add a query to this response?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah, so you talked about Hambantota port. To me, that seemed like a perfect example of Chinese failure, not success. First, they lent 1 billion for making the port. The Sri Lankan government could not pay. They defaulted. Then they got a Norwegian company to mediate a fair bidding process. China again bid and put in another billion to run it for 99 years. So right now, as I can see, China's 2 billion out of pocket, and they have a lease. Why is that not a Chinese failure?
Alongside, I think because domestic politics in many developing countries, for example, Hambantota was the hometown of Mahinda Rajapaksa, and he wanted to, build something in his constituency, in his hometown, irrespective of the feasibility and the need of such a big port or airport or cricket stadium. And the same has been happening in many developing countries. I can give the example here from Pakistan, for example. Rashaka Economic Zone is in district Nowshera in our province. It's the hometown of former Chief Minister Parvez Khattak, who is now Defense Minister under the PTI political party. So a comprehensive analysis, a feasibility study, whether we really need an economic zone in this particular district, whether we need a second port in Hambantota when the Colombo port is not used up to full capacity. So there is also a problem, I would say, from many developing countries, politicians, from their leaders, to negotiate these projects on a real need basis, rather than just to show to their masses that I have done something in my hometown, in my home city, etc. So it's quite a complex problem, I would say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. And we will move on to our next presenter. We have from Syracuse University. I think I've gone ahead and made you a co-host. You have screen sharing permissions here, Mohammed.
Can everyone see that?
Wonderful.
Okay, awesome. Great. So I just want to thank everybody, who put this conference together. During a pandemic, I've myself have, been involved in putting together an online component for a conference myself, and I understand the challenges that come with that. So I just want to thank everybody, who was involved in putting this conference together. And so this project was really a project that I did primarily for my master's thesis, really looking at Pakistan's relationship to the Middle East. That's kind of been my research focus throughout my years in graduate school, is really to understand the ways in which South Asia and the Middle East are very interconnected, right? And in many ways, although we think of them as two distinct regions, right? Historically, that's not always been the case. And actors within the Middle East, within South Asia, the US, for example, other international actors have always kind of melded the two regions in very interesting ways. And that's really what this project is trying to do, or tried to do. Second, let me just do that. Okay. So this is just a map of the Persian Gulf region, and this is a US map, particularly from the CIA. So this is how the United States government viewed the Persian Gulf region, which I think is important. I'm not going to talk about that in my presentation too much, but if there's questions about that, I can definitely talk about it. But you can see here this conception, right, of the Indian Ocean as this kind of important region. This is not just a construction that the US creates and that's important to the United States, but this is a construction that Pakistan, for example, Iran, Saudi Arabia, many of the Gulf states will use this same construction in very important ways, which I will talk about in this presentation. So in the aftermath of the 1971 Indo-Pak War, newly elected civilian president Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was left to pick up the pieces after a bitter defeat that separated Pakistan from its eastern wing in establishing the state of Bangladesh. Pakistan's conduct during the war, especially its brutal suppression of Bengalis, sullied its international reputation. Historically, Pakistan relied on the West, particularly the US, to sustain its economy and other needs. Yet in Bhutto's view, the US did little to support Pakistan during this war, And now, as a result of Pakistan's conduct during this war, Washington was very reluctant to continue this economic and military support. So Bhutto understood he could no longer primarily rely on this Western support. So under the guise of Third World and Islamic solidarity, he sought out support from Africa and the Middle East. In his first few months in office, he embarked on a tour of the region with notable stops in Iran and Saudi Arabia. He was also a student of international relations, and so he framed this relationship as an emergence of a new bloc in the Third World and global politics, and envisioned Pakistan at its head, or at least that was his ambition, to have Pakistan be the head of this new bloc. So in hosting the Second Islamic Summit Conference in 1974, coordinating with Iran to establish the RCD, Regional Cooperation for Development, and establishing cultural and religious links to Saudi Arabia, I argue that Bhutto constructed a Third World and Islamic solidarity discourse to rectify the myriad of issues facing Pakistan in the aftermath of 1971, and to establish an alternative to the US-Soviet dynamic throughout the Cold War, and again, envisioning Pakistan as the head of this construction. Throughout Bhutto's time in office, he pursued bilateral relations with Riyadh and Tehran, but that is not to say other states in the Middle East and the larger Third World were forgotten. So Libya played an interesting role in Pakistan's economy and had somewhat of a role in the nuclear program in the 70s. Smaller Gulf states like Kuwait, the UAE, for example, provided Pakistan with a bunch of economic support, and in return, Pakistan, gave technical and military expertise to these states. Indonesia collaborated in joint ventures with Islamabad and contributed to the growth of the economy. However, what I argue here is that Saudi Arabia and Iran were the two principal actors, which are very important to Bhutto and the kind of ambitions that he had, and in an effort to help recover the economy after 1971. So on January 24th, 1972, so only a month after the conclusion of the 71 war, Bhutto embarked on a tour of the Middle East with his advisors. And so Iran was actually the first stop for Bhutto on this tour. And Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, who hosted Bhutto and his staff for lunch at the Mehrabad airport in Tehran, and the press photographed Bhutto, as you can see here, shaking hands with the Shah and walking side by side, right, from the ceremonies that were conducted on the airport tarmac. And so at the conclusion of the trip, a joint communique was issued by both Iran and Pakistan, calling on members of the UN to formalize a ceasefire between Pakistan and India in the aftermath of the 1971 war, and to encourage a withdrawal of both armed forces to their respective sides of Jammu Kashmir. Bhutto then made his way to Afghanistan. He also visited Morocco, Algeria, and a bunch of other states in the Middle East and Africa. But in justifying this trip to the National Assembly in Pakistan, Bhutto claimed that, quote, the main purpose of the mission was to reassure our friends at the highest level that we were taking a firm hold of our national affairs, to thank them for their past help, and to seek their understanding for our grave predicament, end quote. The timing of the trip emphasized the importance Islamabad attributed to its relationship with Tehran and Riyadh. Bhutto's tour of the Middle East and Africa continued throughout 1972, and the Pakistani president met with various Arab and Third World heads of state. While Saudi Arabia was not the first Gulf state that Bhutto visited, he emphasized the kingdom's importance to Pakistan. In speeches to the National Assembly, he noted that there was a national crisis of such magnitude that it could only be rectified by the interrelated domestic and international action. It was in this context that Bhutto justified his travels to the region, claiming that he had, quote, the blessing of the people of Pakistan for the mission. Upon arriving in Saudi Arabia, Bhutto was greeted by King Faisal and various other Saudi ministers at Jeddah airport in June of 1972. And then the two nations held formal talks on matters of interest, attended a state banquet hosted by the king, and participated in various religious ceremonies and rituals. For example, the tawaf, the kissing of the black stone in the Kaaba in Mecca. And here you see Bhutto pictured here participating in that ceremony. And similar to the conclusion of Bhutto's first trip to Iran, upon leaving Saudi Arabia, a joint communique was issued that expressed satisfaction for the growth of political, cultural, and technological relations, commitment to the Sharia as, quote, path of light and guidance, and support for the continuing struggle of the Arab people to liberate the captured territories of the Palestinian people. And then they also generally expressed some support for the Islamic Conference and kind of these increased tensions that we see in 1973 between Lebanon and Israel. So immediately after his visit to the kingdom, Bhutto once again visited Iran. So this is his second trip to Tehran. And he remained in the capital until June 10th before flying back to Islamabad. And once again, Bhutto was cordially received by the Shah at the Mehrabad airport. During the trip, he was photographed with the Shah and both their wives, who we see pictured here. And in addition, the Shah held a banquet in honor of Bhutto in Tehran. Reports of talks at this trip during these meetings were fairly cordial. The language was very much in favor of Pakistan's continued relationship with Iran. In some ways, this represents a controlled press, which was very much the case, I argue, in the early 1970s Pakistan. However, what's striking about this is they also talked about the Simla Agreement of 1972, so which becomes the more or less the effective peace treaty for the 1971 war. And Tehran was emphasizing its support of Pakistani proposals. The two states also expressed their support for the Arab cause in Palestine and support for the Islamic Conference. And Islamabad and Bhutto himself expressed his admiration for Iran for the support that Iran gave to Pakistan during the 71 war. Upon returning to Pakistan on June 10th, Bhutto stressed the success of his visits to the Gulf. In discussing his personal reflections, he stated that his return left him strong and resolute in spirit. Bhutto further expressed his jubilation that everywhere we receive quote, everywhere we receive support for Pakistan's position, with the people and governments of various states rallying to our just cause. Bhutto left the Middle East, feeling that he had vindicated Pakistan's position and that he could now negotiate with Delhi on more favorable terms. Although Bhutto visited several countries on his tour, the visits of Saudi Arabia and Iran stood out. Reflecting on his trip to the kingdom, Bhutto noted how the trip was, quote, one of the greatest experiences of his life and how honored he felt to have been admitted within the portals of the Kaaba, end quote. The trip to Iran was also a success. And in his comments, he mentions how everyone in Pakistan knows the Shah Shah as a sincere friend and well-wisher of Pakistan. So these whirlwind tours of the Middle East and Africa were a resounding success for this new president. At a time where Pakistan's international reputation was tarnished because of the 1971 war, these trips helped to restore Pakistan's prestige and also accumulated much needed support. Furthermore, they assisted in cementing Bhutto's hold over the state. If nations were wary or unsure of Bhutto before, this personal touch alleviated some of those concerns and also strengthened Bhutto's position among his domestic political opposition. While it's clear how these trips strengthened Bhutto's relationship with the Shah and Faisal, they were also important in fulfilling Bhutto's own ambitions to emerge as a leader in the Muslim and Arab Third World. Therefore, Bhutto's tour cemented this new foreign policy based on bilateralism. So this idea that national identity, whether you're Arab, Iranian, Turkish, Pakistani, is not going to be antithetical to this new Islamic solidarity that he's trying to espouse. And so rather, Bhutto really emphasizes these connections and sticking to the tenets of bilateralism, Pakistan would engage on a one-to-one basis with various nations, but it would not stay away from regional organizations. Rather, it would become involved in these various regional organizations that connected the two regions together. And so the foundation for these relationships, Bhutto believed, relied on the establishment of international and regional institutions. Moreover, by promoting the Arab cause at every opportunity and elevating the Palestinian issue from a regional to a universal one, Bhutto believed he could promote Pakistan as a key leader of both the Muslim and Third worlds. But then on October 6, 1973, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israeli forces in the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights. The early success of Syrian and Egyptian forces prompted the Israelis to request the US government for a resupply of weapons. The Nixon administration obliged this request and began an airlift of military supplies into Israel. With this support, the Israeli military was able to drive back the Syrian and Egyptian forces and emerged victorious in this war. However, the 1973 war was claimed as a great victory and is often referred to as the Ramzan War among Muslim states. And this kind of call reverberated throughout various Muslim majority states. And in response to this US support of Israel during the war, Arab members of OPEC imposed an oil embargo on the US. And what's important about this embargo is it initiated a global oil crisis, which not only increased the price of oil, but also led to a massive spike in global inflation. Notably, Iran and Iraq did not participate in the embargo and actually took advantage of it to increase their own prices and maximize their own production of oil. But this is the context in which we get to the Second Islamic Summit Conference of 1974. And so historically, the conference was established as a forum for Muslim majority states to coordinate their resources and unify policy, and particularly in regard to the Arab-Israeli dispute. The first summit conference was held on August 25th, 1969, when the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem was burned. In response to the event, King Faisal of Saudi Arabia and King Hassan of Jordan quickly and rather hastily organized to develop a unified response from Muslim majority countries. While the conference preached unity and Islamic solidarity, the Arab Muslim states in 1969 were actually very divided. So out of 30 states that were invited, only 24 attended in various capacities. Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, notably, did not attend the conference, and this is largely due to his ongoing proxy war in Yemen, and he's fighting the Saudis in this regard for control over Yemen. And so instead, he sends Anwar Sadat in his place. Iraq and Syria refused to attend this first event, and so these rivalries were largely influenced by this Arab Cold War. But in the Second Islamic Conference of 1974, there was far more attention given to it from Muslim majority states across the world. And because of the Ramadan War and the oil revolution of 1973, so from the perspective of the oil producing states in the Middle East, the crisis is not referred to as a crisis, but a revolution. Arab states were far more unified. So Algeria, Tunisia, Iraq, Morocco, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, all dispatched forces to Egypt and Syria during the war. In 1968, and so in the aftermath of this war in Yemen, Cairo worked to improve relations with Riyadh, Iraq, to develop relations with Iran, which were broken off in 1970, and Syria resumed its relations with Jordan, which were broken off in 1971. So in preparation of the conference, with support of King Faisal, who made it a point to let Pakistan host this conference, it was decided that the conference would be hosted in Lahore, Pakistan, from February 22nd to the 24th. And in hosting the conference, Bhutto was able to shine the spotlight on Pakistan and was successful in bringing prominent figures of the Arab world to Lahore for this conference. So for example, Yasser Arafat of the PLO, King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi, Anwar Sadat. And so on this image, you can see some of those figures here. So in the center, you see Bhutto. To the right, you see Anwar Sadat, you see King Faisal. On the left side of the image, you can see Yasser Arafat, you can see Gaddafi. And the overall goal of this conference was to express this Muslim solidarity from around the world for the Arab cause, and especially for the cause of the Palestinians. But Bhutto had ulterior motives for hosting this conference. While he did believe in promoting the Arab cause and supporting Palestine, he also hoped the conference would boost the morale of a defeated Pakistan after the 71 war. Furthermore, Bhutto wanted the Pakistani economy to receive a boost from oil-rich nations in attendance, something which became more crucial as a result of global inflation. In his public comments, however, Bhutto expressed Pakistan's support for the Arab cause and Islamic solidarity. In a speech to the National Assembly in December, Bhutto explained that the Islamic Summit Conference is being held in Pakistan to demonstrate Islamic unity and solidarity for the just and honorable cause of the Arab people. With the location of the conference set, preparations were underway in Lahore. So the military assisted the civil security forces with security. The medical corps was on standby, ready to assist for medical emergencies should they arise. And as the delegates arrived to Lahore, crowds were cheering for the delegates, who each received a 21-gun salute. Along the 7-mile trip from the airport to Shahi Fort, crowds were carrying banners in French, in Urdu, and Arabic, which became the 3 official languages of the summit. And the representation for this conference was significantly better than the one that occurred in 67, sorry. Out of 38 states that are invited, 24 were represented at the head of state level, 5 at the head of government level, 7 at the foreign minister level. And really crucially, Yasser Arafat was kind of given this head of state designation for the PLO. So again, the Muslim world recognizing the PLO as a diplomatic and political force, which will become important for the PLO going forward. And in the keynote address for the summit, Bhutto expressed his gratitude for, quote, the honor upon me, which in reality is a tribute to Pakistan. In addition, Bhutto reminded the delegates of Pakistan's support for the causes of the Muslim world which was organically related to Pakistan's own national vocation. While the address expressed notions of Islamic solidarity and Pakistan's deep attachment to the Middle East, such as its deep attachment to Iran, the address went beyond this theme. Bhutto connected Pakistan's struggle during the 71 war to the larger global pan-Islamic struggle, recounting how Pakistan, in his view, had been a victim of international conspiracies, but still advocated for nothing but justice and concern for Muslim rights. More importantly, the Prime Minister connected the struggle of the Muslim world to the larger struggle of the Third World, arguing that it is in our interest that we promote rather than subvert the solidarity of the Third World. Moreover, Bhutto linked these struggles to the oil crisis of 1973. The Martella crisis created divisions between the oil and non-oil producing nations of the Third World. These differences, Bhutto claimed, created the dislocation in the balance of payments positions of developing countries, which could be utilized to sow discord and cause disarray in the ranks of Asian and African nations. And so the effects of this oil crisis were pretty drastic, and in the US context, the image we're really familiar with is these gas lines. But for the developing world specifically, for example, Pakistan, India, Ethiopia, etc., and specifically for Pakistan, the inflation raised the import bill significantly above national export earnings. So for example, before the price increase, before inflation, 70% of Pakistan's foreign exchange earnings were used for oil imports. And then after that increase, 41% were used for similar countries. And then from 75 to 76, 33% of those total export earnings paid for oil and fertilizer imports. Therefore, while the overall goal of the summit for Muslim nations was to unify in the aftermath of the Ramadan War, significant attention was given to the plight of non-oil producing nations, reeling from price increases and inflation. In the keynote address, Bhutto calls on oil producing states to assist the economies of other third world states. A delegation from Iran offered its own proposal, and this pretty much involved creating a minimum $1 million fund to help aid developing countries. And overall, the conference in general, right, was not only meant to help these nations bounce back from this global inflation, right, but again, to express this Islamic solidarity and larger third world solidarity. For example, to remove poverty, disease, ignorance, help the developing countries reorganize their trade deals with the West and other parts of the world. So the critics of the OIC, which becomes the Organization of Islamic Conference, claim that it never brought about tangible results for the member states, precisely because the organization had little power to enforce any given rules. And in some regards, this argument holds true. But for the 1970s, and for Bhutto in particular, the Second Islamic Summit Conference was a resounding success. It further strengthened Islamabad's ties to Saudi Arabia economically and politically. While the Shah did not personally attend this conference, it still strengthened Pakistan's connections to Iran, and particularly that proposal to introduce new funds for development. And Iran is going to fund a lot of the development in Pakistan in the 1970s in various ways. In addition, Bhutto was able to successfully promote the Palestinian cause by giving the PLO a greater voice in Middle Eastern politics. And more importantly, the conference really allowed Bhutto to recognize Bangladesh in a way that the Pakistani public could accept. And so during the conference, Sheikh Mujib Rahman becomes the leader of Bangladesh, is at this conference, right? And Pakistan formally recognizes Bangladesh as an independent state. Okay. And so historically, I want to focus a little bit here about Pakistan and Iran. So historically, Pakistan and Iran relations date back to the independence of Pakistan in 1947. The Shah was one of the first world leaders to recognize Pakistan and support Pakistan's case in the Kashmir issue. In 1950, the two states signed a treaty of friendship, and more importantly, in 1955, they signed the Baghdad Pact. Baghdad Pact, which is this defense organization that involved Turkey and a few of the nations, and a conception to contain the Soviet Union from entering into the Middle East and Asia. But during the 71 war, particularly, Iran assisted Pakistan in various ways. It sheltered Pakistan's civil airline fleet, sent supplies to Karachi, extinguished fires, and it also maintained the flow of oil to Pakistan, and also met sword shortages in ammunition and aircraft. And so Bhutto understood the importance of Iran to Pakistan's foreign policy. Tehran was a key ally that supplied Islamabad with economic aid while also valuing the integrity and security of the Pakistani state. And the shot for the national. Bhutto noted that the both states were already allies and had a system of cooperation in defense. Islamabad lost faith in other defense pacts, which did nothing to help Pakistan in the 71 war. And so there was a reorganization in Pakistani foreign policy to create this new kind of dynamic. And Iran was a key part of that. And this partnership really did extend beyond security. And I know I'm running against time here a little bit, and I can talk more about how that's the case if people have that question in the Q&A. But primarily economically, this is how Bhutto defended this relationship with Iran. And that was particularly through the RCD, which was first established by Ayub Khan in 1964, who thought of it, and he conceived of this as the Alliance for Progress, and later it was renamed the RCD. And really what this organization did was to further embed the economies of Iran and Pakistan together, or at least that was the intent. But it also emphasized historical and cultural links between these states. And really thought of Pakistan and Iran, and Turkey was also involved in this too, as one region, as one kind of culturally and historically connected region. And Bhutto had high hopes for the RCD. He wished to create a new regional framework, right, that could exist Pakistan in its own regional disputes, which other pacts did not do. And he really hoped that this economic cooperation with the RCD would help alleviate Pakistan's economic troubles. And he expresses this very much so in many of the documents that and a lot of these summits that Pakistan hosts and that Iran hosts about the RCD. And so what's important here about the RCD, in many ways, like the OIC, didn't really come to fruition, but in many ways did fund a decent amount of development in Pakistan in the 1970s. And so finally, to reviewing this foreign policy in a February 1977 statement, the Pakistani Ministry of Foreign Affairs recounted important milestones attained throughout the 1970s. For example, the Second Islamic Summit Conference, the RCD, the influx of Pakistani manpower to the Gulf, which becomes a very important influx of money to Pakistan that starts in the 1970s and continues onward throughout the years. And also that Pakistan, while receiving this economic money for development, etc., is also involved in training military personnel within the Gulf, right, and stationing Pakistani troops within the Gulf. And so what's really key here is Iran and Saudi Arabia really funding a lot of these projects, a lot of development. Saudi Arabia, I think at one point funds about $100 million for development aid to Pakistan. And even in exports and imports, a lot of exports that Pakistan is sending out are going to Iran and Saudi Arabia. Other imports and also receiving in those two places. And so through his tours of Africa and the Middle East, the Second Islamic Summit Conference, and the RCD, Bhutto attempted to establish a new regional bloc that was removed from this imperialistic superpower Cold War politics. So getting away from this US-Soviet dynamic and getting at something different, right? Something that would be led by states within the Arab world, the Muslim majority world, third world, etc. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you so much. Do we have any questions before we jump into Irene's presentation? All right, if not, we can jump right into the next one. And then if other questions come up, we can always circle back near the end, depending how much time we have left. Did I make you co-host? It looks like, do you have screen sharing capabilities, Irene?
So yeah. Yeah, there we go. So should I start?
Yes, whenever you're ready.
Okay, perfect. So can you see
Perfect. Yes.
Yeah. So first of all, I would like to thank all the SASA entire team to providing us wonderful opportunity to present and share my research. So basically, I just want to explain that this I'm going to write the chapter on South Asia in 21st century. So it would be wonderful to share this research with all of you. So South Asia in pursuit of human security, challenges and concerns in 21st century. So first of all, let me explain. So I don't know from where I can share the complete screen. Just wait for a minute. So I'm curious from where I can share the entire screen. So can you see it?
To go into presenter mode, I think that maybe click the view tab in the top right section.
Click the hide thumbnail video.
There we go. Or slideshow.
So
On
they
the-
share
right there, or move your mouse over again. We can also see it like this if you'd like to just click through this way.
okay, perfect. So I think it's a bit missing. Okay, perfect. So I will start. So first of all, the objective of my study. So what forced me to write this paper? So it's all about the security of South Asia. In fact, security debates have changed over the years. Since the post-Cold War era, now the focus more on people-centric rather than state-centric security. In this backdrop, the point that despite attaining steady economic growth, South Asia faced heavy, problems because of state-centric security issue. So this study examines that the problem of social well-being is a core dilemma of all the governments of this region. The states of this side required to emphasize on mushrooming traditional security intimidations to encourage the insurance of the communities. So what I want to explain that theoretical understanding. So here I want to explain that in international relations, so we have mostly the realism theory, state-centric approach. But in South Asia, what is the problem? I can exemplify about Pakistan and India rivalry. So it's more like the state-centric approach. And in that case, what is the problem with this region? That human beings are suffering because of this problem. Therefore, in my study, I have applied the Mehbubul Haq's work, the non-traditional security threats for South Asian countries. So here you can see that why South Asia matters, because of Indian Ocean, Middle East countries, and it directly connects to the China and Russia as a new emerging powers. So dynamic evolution of the security paradigm. So what is important in traditional security? Sovereign states, national and political dimensions. But what is important in state human security? What matters? Political, environment, economic, food, health, and personal and community. So it matters in human security that is missing in South Asian countries. So again, what is in human security? Human security has got worldwide attention. It outlines individual safekeeping, humans that recover social freedoms and understanding. So besides safeguarding people risky and unavoidable doubts and situations, operating undertaking that structure inspiration and aims. It develops fundamental shared environmental, lucrative, equipped and indigenous arrangements that mutually postulate people the establishing portion of existence, preservation, and self-respect. Further, an adherent of this approach communicated security a revolutionary impression that deep-rooted in everyday's life that is quoted by the Mehboob Haq. So again, in human security, what matters, as it is supposed that the foremost drive of well-being should be people rather than borders or state conflicts. To combat conflicts as well as from other non-traditional security dangers. Undernourishment and contamination like this, it requires a recognized engagement to prevent coercions and also to forecast any plausible cautioning. Starvation, inundation, and mark improvement, established equipment in-house to listen the loss shaped by the illness of people's daily life. So human security, the South Asian perspective. Physically, South Asian comprises Afghanistan, Bangladesh, as we all know, Bhutan, India, the Maldives, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. It is closely situated nearby the Middle East, Central Asian, and the Indian Ocean region. Besides topography and common past, there is that inspires or forces the area to observe. Interestingly, this region is currently the least cohesive parts of the planet, with an intra-regional business only reckoning for percent and linked to 58% of Europe, 52% of the North American region, and 26% of East Asia. Throughout the beginning, the region has faced cruel environmental disaster, human nutrition anxiety, increasing economic crisis, fluctuating safety patterns, and above all, the beginning of international radicalism in the aftershock of 9/11. So these are the basic backdrop of this study. So human security, the South Asian perspective. It is particularly pertinent for the 8 states as the region consists that 7% of the planet's deprived, almost half of the world's undernourished kids, and endure from a member of growth and ground cracks. So here you can see this, I have draw this, what are important in human based security. So what policymakers should do to avoid the conflict and focus on human well-being. So first of all, poverty and inequality, environmental security, climate change, food and water security, economic crime, human and drug trafficking, poor governance and instability, terrorism, extremism, and ethnic tension, and health security. So yeah, I'm writing so this chapter, so therefore I was just drawing again the global health security rank. So you can see here that how poorly, like if Afghanistan is on the top, and then comes the Pakistan, where, and then the Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and India. So the lack of human security is another important reason for the lack of growth in the South Asian countries. So South Asia Poverty Index. So in the top of the list, you can see India, Bangladesh, again Nepal, Pakistan, Maldives, and Bhutan and Sri Lanka. So this is the rate of human poverty in South Asia. So my question and my argument in this study is that policymakers should think out of the box and try to negate the state-centric approach and most focused on non-traditional security methods to keep this region peaceful, as did the East Asian countries. So the pockets of high poverty region, you can see here the area of Balochistan, again Bhutan, and the Indian central Indian part of this region. So income poverty in South Asia, again Bangladesh, you can see the below 2%, and Pakistan, India, and Sri Lanka. So this is the national poverty rate overall in the South Asian regions. So this is very interesting to note that Goldman Sachs papers I have just quoted here, that throughout in the world, South Asia has 25% population, but unfortunately, it is the most conflict oriented region. And then East Asia, Africa, North America, South America, and Europe. And this is one of the reason I would say that in South Asian countries, mostly all the cream or the educated elite, they try to settle abroad because of this conflict region, and they don't think to work on it permanently. So again, poverty region wise, the South Asia is on the top, and then comes the East Asia, Middle East, they in Europe and Latin America. There is very low poverty as compared to South Asian regions. So then comes the food insecurity. Nutrition, hygiene, a central feature of human well-being, is described as all individuals at all epochs have an economic reach to fundamental diet. The key difficulty in South Asia is not material accessible of meal to accomplish least good condition. Nevertheless, material and physical approach to nutrition is a gigantic challenge. Likewise, India remains competent to attain a noteworthy economic development. The uppermost position hitherto, it nevertheless has 194.6 million malnourishment citizens, the second highest in the world. Food and Agricultural Organization annual report I have derived from that. So again, though the convenience of adequate food is an indispensable order, safety nonetheless not sufficient to safeguard people's approach. They can be starved even when a lot of food is obtainable. Therefore, the Earth's maximum preparation of starvation, predominantly South Asia, somewhere nearly 23 ratios people. Whereas bearing in mind diet reassurance is another important ingredient for human growth. So again, South Asian states and their environmental and ecological issues are another key issue that policy makers should again think about these issues rather than the state-centric approach. So you can see here the position of Bangladesh: loss of biodiversity, limited access to potable water, waterborne disease, prevalent water polluting, especially of fishing areas, urban air pollution, soil degradation, deforestation, industrial pollution, and then in Bhutan, soil erosion, high rate of urbanization, and in India, deforestation, soil erosion, organizing desertification, loss of biodiversity, air pollution are the key problems in South Asian countries, particularly water pollution. Natural disasters such as floods, cyclones, and landslides are very common in the Indian region. Likewise, in Maldives, climate change, beach erosion, degradation of marine habitats, high population densities, increased in marine-based tourism. At Nepal, deforestation, soil erosion and degradation, loss of biodiversity. Again, water pollution is a key issue in South Asian regions, high rate of urbanization, and in Pakistan where we are living, water pollution is very common, seasonal limitations on the availability of natural fresh water. Even I can share my experience when I'm teaching at Forman Christian University. A lot of our university, they had to close the campus because of the constant coughing and sneezing of students because of this COVID-19 pandemic and environmental challenges. So this is like eyewitness I can share with you. So deforestation, soil erosion, habitat loss, and degradation of marine environment again is major problems in Pakistan. So in Sri Lanka, deforestation, soil erosion, loss of biodiversity, coastal degradation, limited access to potable water, excessive pressure on forest, deficit in urban infrastructure, water pollution by municipal and industrial waste are the key issues in Sri Lankan state as well. So what are the key findings and conclusions? So first of all, I would like to appreciate Dr. Murad's presentation on BRE. But one thing I just want to clarify about the Belt and Road Initiative, that, this project can only be successful like CPAC and BRA if if the policymakers of South Asia, East Asia, and Middle East countries would think out of the box and care about the human security rather than just to build a belt and try to build it to get economic benefits. So this is my argument of this in this study, this that without human involvement we can't complete CPAC and Belt and Road Initiative project. Particularly, I'm working on Balochistan as well, so there are a key problem that local people are showing keen interest that policymakers are not taking care of the local needs. So these are the key problems of South Asian countries, where whenever a project starts in South Asia, because of the state-centric approach and border conflict, so it is difficult to complete it and make it practical. So this work has explored the problem of human insecurity in South Asia, regardless of increasing international alteration. In South Asian linger to overpowering trust on old-fashioned in its place of human-centric reassurance. While the area has accomplished a determined financial development, the situation has not remained proficient to advance the existence persons as well as rest one of the supreme underprivileged areas, earth along universal disparity. In South Asia, the matter is not actually about absence of assets. So there are a lot of natural resources, but the problem is how to utilize those assets. So it is further disparity and foundness, the administration to network vastness of the assets considered vital for state well-being, then collective growth to efficiently exploit the obtainable human welfare. Furthermore, intimidations to human refugee exceed topographical limitations, management of the area, basic to evidence the people's ordinary life. So here in the end, I would like to share that I have mentioned this SARC. So South Asian countries should work on the regional organizations. For example, in East Asian countries, I think one of their famous writer, they have mentioned that we East Asian has more conflicts than the South Asian countries, but luckily we are able to cope with, and they are contributing I think 22% of overall world GDP. But South Asian countries, they are like 25%, despite 25% of population. So their world contribution is only 5% a contribution across the globe. So therefore, I would say the other solution of South Asian countries is to focus on the regional connectivity and by negating the state-centric approach. So this is all from my side. If you have any question. So as a whole, the work argues that in order to discourse political, social, ethnic differences, the responsibility is far more about the nation. So this is what I'm saying time and again. To arrange the human safekeeping program through shared partnership rather than to blame the outside forces. So what I have observed that South Asian countries are, rather than to blame the developed state or superpowers all the time, that they are creating problem in South Asia, they should focus on their own region. Policymakers should think about this reality, that they have to resolve the issue by themselves rather than to always go for blaming attitude that this is the Western uh, elite class, that they are not allowing to make this region peaceful. So rather than to blame other states, South Asian countries should think be out of the box, about by getting out of state-centric approach in order to cope with the human security issues in this region. So that's it from my side. So if you have any question, Rafiq Dosani.
Yeah, I
Yes,
have a
sir.
question. Thank you for that
Yeah.
presentation.
Yeah.
My question is about the issue you raised of SARC and how
Mhm.
it has failed to address the issue of poverty alleviation. And you gave a comparison with East Asia. Now, East Asia,
Mhm.
to my knowledge, has not cooperated at all on poverty alleviation, nor has Southeast Asia
Mhm.
through ASEAN or any other bloc. Poverty alleviation, by almost by definition, is a state-centric problem to be solved through the approach
Mhm.
you recommend, the human-centric approach. I agree with that, but doesn't require
Mhm.
cooperation between two countries to solve poverty issues. So I'd like
Mhm.
your feedback on that.
Yeah, I got your point. So, what is my take on it? That you're right that poverty is state's own problem. So, but the thing is, if I'm talking about if South Asian countries come out of the state-centric approach, because of state-centric approach in South Asian countries, there are a lot of terrorism, conflicts, and ethnic issues. So, if they and they're investing a lot on these matters. I would say in South Asian countries, the conflict is within rather than without. So this is my take, that if they would try to resolve the issue by themselves rather than to see that somebody would come to to cope these challenges, the poverty, or it's not about the poverty challenges, other human security challenges. So then it would be easier to follow the footsteps like the East Asian, ASEAN, and what the European Union did. So I'm talking about more on regional cooperation. So,
Well,
and
that
for
was my
that,
point. Why is regional cooperation necessary for poverty
so,
alleviation?
for poverty evolution, I would say for regional cooperation, definitely if we would do, like European Union are doing great job in this term, that they are facilitating the other states in terms of aids and scholarships. So if South Asian can work on it, then we can meet with these challenges. So like education, other needs, then if the basic needs of human beings would be completed, then automatically we can cope on with the
So,
poverty
so
issue as well. So
you're
why
arguing that
poverty arises?
you're arguing that 8 poor countries of South Asia should help each other with aid. That's not going to happen.
Yeah,
They're all
yeah.
poor countries.
Yeah,
And how
but
would
I
it
think
really help?
India is the emerging.
So India
India is
should
the
give foreign
next.
aid to Pakistan and Bangladesh and so on to help its
No,
education.
I'm not talking about
When your own
aid.
data showed that India is in
Can
bad
I
shape.
actually debate a while?
No, I'm not saying they should give each other aid. They should at least cooperate at this level. So to
Well,
think
what does
out
it
of the
mean
box.
to cooperate? We should have a definition. Give me an example of cooperation.
Okay. Yes, Dr. Murad, do you want to add
So,
something?
I mean, what I can say in this one, or rather to add to your point, I mean, in this was not just foreign aid, regional trade, integration, more trade among themselves, easy or convenient flow of people, goods, and services. It can really help. Rather than we trade with countries in the US, for example, Pakistan, largest trade partner, export destination, the US. Of course, it's important, but neighboring India, we don't trade that much. So,
Yeah,
interregional trade, investment, flow of people,
exactly.
goods, and services can play a tremendous role in
In
jobs,
poverty
employment
alleviation,
generation, and all
yeah.
of these things.
So this is what I'm saying. Otherwise, South Asian countries, no doubt, we are poor in this part of the world. But what I'm saying that with cooperation and we can do better. So it's not about aid. Aid is not the answer, but I would say the cooperation and collaboration in different sector should be the right answer to meet the challenges of 21st century. So rather than talk about always on conflict side, like Pakistan India animosity on Kashmir matter, and other conflicting problems are common in South Asian countries. So if we are able to think that why other regions are progressing, why is not South Asia? So this is my take. Then we can work on it collectively. So I got your point. It's difficult, it's challenging because we are not as rich as the north states, but even though so how far So my question is how far South Asia would be in the state of conflict, and we are only producing 25% population. Global population is here in South Asian countries.
Mr.
So the
Cowley has a
solution is
question.
the answer. Yeah.
There's a question from Mr. Cowley.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, I was gonna say, someone asked before that, I think the poverty, a lot of it's a mismanagement of resources. If we assume that we have enough for people to live a basic standard, then the resources aren't being managed well. And that has to do with the location. And so within any community, you have a certain distances between people and the goods. So that's why the cooperation is important, because from town to town, whether it be from Lahore to Karachi or Lahore to Delhi, the further distances you go, we're sharing resources. When we don't share them, then that's the problem.
Yeah, and we always try to, welcome the other states to assist us. So this is what the fundamental problem, another reason of the conflict. Then states they have to pay the price for that assistance and aid. So this is what I'm saying, that then it would be difficult to manage to keep South Asia as a peaceful region.
I think in Pakistan, you have a feudal system that will take the cream off the top no matter what happens. Until that system is properly reformed.
Yeah,
you have
exactly.
highly educated professional classes who are able to function. You saw the ease of business report of the ADB recently.
Yeah, Pakistan, Pakistan, a hard country, is all about that, the narrative. It's a wonderful book. So it's all about the feudal structure.
Yeah, so I mean, that's not going to be affected by trade. So I don't think more trade is the solution. Pakistan can trade freely with Sri Lanka. You have a 200 million person country. It doesn't need an India to grow up and do well. It's big enough. It's the 5th or 6th largest populated country in the world. Why does it need an India to trade with to do well?
So the same
But with India, we have a historical bag.
No, I'm saying just as India is ignoring Pakistan and doing quite well, Pakistan should do quite well ignoring India. It's large enough.
Or they could get along.
Yeah, but that's not going to happen as long as Kashmir is the thorn in the flesh for the next several decades.
Yeah. Kashmir issue is a major problem.
So let's ignore that and say there's nothing going to happen between India and Pakistan. Why can't Pakistan grow up and do well? There's no reason it should remain such a poor country, especially now with 60 billion coming in from CPEC.
Yeah, and therefore I would say that China is a big sport as an emerging power, as a neighboring state. China is a big
you can trade with
boost
China
for
freely.
our economy. Yeah.
But the reality is, exporters in Pakistan have told me they can't even do a few container loads worth of goods to China. I mean, the scope is not there. Pakistan is not developed enough to do trade beyond a few items.
Yes, that's true. Pakistan is not diversified as industrial base. I mean, from school age, you remember industry. So this is textile, and to some extent is medical instrument.
Surgical, stainless steel, textiles, and football. 3 items that are
exactly. So no diversification in our economy.
2 decades of studying Pakistan, these 3 items just keep coming up.
Exactly, that's true. Yeah.
And you look at India, how it's changing. I go back there all the time. I'm from India. There's a remarkable revolution, I would say, in its industrial base.
Yeah, true.
So yes, sir.
Yeah, I've got a question. If the countries of Europe, in spite of 2 world wars, countries in Europe could come together and form a European Union. What is the problem that the countries of the Indian subcontinent
this is what
together only a few years ago?
Exactly. So this is my take.
Come together.
Yeah. And Japan and China, they had very strong rivalry, but as a biggest partner in East Asia, they are bringing East Asia out of, their economy is getting higher and higher. But South Asia, what is the problem? Only Kashmir is the issue, and that is not the issue, to be very honest. So it's only a conflict between the both states, so that they can't grow as a state. So these are only the, I would say, the power elite from both sides. They are not trying to resolve the matter. So that, I would say, frankly, army's role, so these are the basic, crucial realities that South Asian countries don't try to talk about, and they don't want to meet these challenges. Otherwise, South Asian problems are nothing in front of Europe and East Asian countries. So they had more crucial historical baggage than the South Asian countries.
Yeah, but I remember I asked my German colleague, but the wars that these people have fought, France and Germany and Europe, and he asked me, don't ever compare India and Pakistan. You haven't beaten each other. You have not fought a war. 1965, 71, just a few, 100,000 people died. So never come. My German colleague told me, never compare what we have gone through. So I said, it's unfortunate for the people of India and Pakistan to learn it the hard way. Why they shouldn't learn it the soft way? What other people have been doing, how other nations have resolved their bilateral issues.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
hard
really,
and
really
soft
unfortunate
power.
that we still, we are in that, colonial baggage, that historical baggage. So it's just unfortunate, and we hope some true statesmen, they come resolve these issues. It's not the matter of politicians whose only aim is to prolong their regime. Yeah.
Exactly. And I want to share, when I visited America, so I was felt that we have more into like Indian scholar. We feel more attached with them because of historical baggage, so we have a very cultural baggage with India.
We
So they're
have
not our
food, we have
enemies.
language, we have Indian movies, we have
Exactly.
cricket, we have all many similarities, of course.
Yeah. And to be very honest, no, the term enemy seems me very international relations kind of words. So enemy is not a word in international politics, no, particularly since the 21st century,
To some extent,
the power
we can
transition
blame
theory.
We can blame the UK, which resolved this issue unresolved. The Kashmir issue, UK is a big culprit. But again, also Pakistan and India and their political leadership, they are the man responsible. They need to resolve. They need to live a good and prosperous South Asia or Indo-Pakistan region for their coming generations. Not to continue these issues, but then what will the militaries of the two countries eat? What will the politicians play politics? And also the international military industrial complex. French military complex, German and US largest arms exporter, what they will do? They will never do. But of course, they have to, but the main responsibility was the Indian and Pakistani leadership. Of course, it's their responsibility to resolve this.
There's a colonial legacy, right, that we have to understand, that came over, so when we talk about India and Pakistan as being, post-colonial states, a lot of scholars have challenged that idea, right? India practices its own version. I've argued, all scholars argue, in Kashmir. Pakistan does a similar, I would argue, a kind of colonialism when the territories Kashmir holds. So this is colonial legacy that's continued since before partition, after partition, and that's an important legacy we need to consider. And it speaks to Murad's point about leadership. So have this leadership that very much thinks in these ways, which continues conflict.
Yeah, exactly. So, and this is what we often scholars talk with each other, that we have to go. We have to think out of the box and come out of the colonial legacy, colonial narrative that Indians are our enemies. So we don't talk about the centuries, and in BCs we have such a historical baggage with India. We always talk about British time period, that Indians were our enemy once. So yeah, this is what the problem of South Asian countries. And what I would say that again, Dr. Murad is right that the responsibility is more on Pakistan and India, because it's the two physically largest state of South Asian countries. So they should treat each other like brothers in order to bring stability in South Asia. So, and we as a South Asian, to be very honest, it's very heart touching for us to see South Asian, just like the Europe, East Asia, and other developed state of the world. So we have been tired while hearing the reality, the South Asia as a terrorist region or a conflict-oriented region. So particularly, the youngest generation, I'm talking about that. So these are the concerns and therefore we are doing research and trying to build new narratives so that we can better, present ourselves in front of the world. Yeah.
My opinion is that South Asian countries should treat each other as sisters, not as brothers. Not beat up on each other all the time as they do.
It's a nice solution, yeah.
Yes, yes, I agree with you.
India was more of an elder sister to Pakistan, saying, "I'll help you." It
Mm-hmm.
has the capacity to do so rather than saying, "I'll beat you up if you behave badly." That would make a difference. It's not going to happen in your generation, even certainly not in mine. And I don't think that's, that different solutions have to be found.
Yes, sir. Makes sense.